thank you for joining us today. I'm here with Carolyn Miller from the Honeycomb Effect, and following on from our great debate a few weeks ago, we were completely overwhelmed by all of your questions and engagement, so we've decided to answer hopefully most of those questions here today. Our first question today is, why are some brands, or as you put it during the debate, the people behind the brands, so good at making people feel something while others are not so good at it? And do you believe that it comes down to your brand values, aligning swiftly with the zeitgeist, or is there some other magic formula?
There is an alchemy to it, I will say that, because I think that some really well thought through brands even don't necessarily execute or create the feeling that they'd really like to, or what the original plan was. And it can't be mimicked either. So I think one of the more interesting cases that we've seen of late was obviously Steve Jobs, and what he did with Apple is always kind of really marked as an incredibly powerful brand, and also his personal brand was also quite powerful. And I think when you try to see that copied by Theranos and what they did, and with their founder actually trying to copy Steve, mimicking him almost executionally, like she used to wear the black turtleneck like Steve used to wear, and was really trying to copy the magic that happened with that. But the thing is, it's not, there is an alchemy to it, but it can't be something that you write down. There is an instinct and a feeling that comes through with it. And what I would say is that the quickest way, from my point of view, that you can kill kind of the brand magic is to test too much in research beforehand. Now, this is controversial.
Yes, it is.
It's a highly controversial statement, and as someone who actually does research, it's probably not good for my own business to be saying this. But I do think that when you research things heavily, you find that you get averages. And that's what you're doing in many cases, is trying to make sure that you're not doing anything that's going to be damaging to your brand. Mm-hmm. Because often when you're showing storyboards or you're showing ideas to a group of people, or even online through a group of people, they're looking at it through a research lens. They're not necessarily going to be able to get the instincts correctly of what could happen if there's momentum behind it in the population. And I think one of the most classic examples of this as well is Nike's Just Do It failed in research. So, there is, as I said, some real kind of passion that has to be behind the marketers to actually take a punt and go, I believe in this, I see that socially this is going to work, and I trust my instincts.
Yeah, and it's interesting actually, because even the Steve Jobs piece, a lot of people didn't really relate to him, and his methodology of driving things through probably is not something that would pass a lot of tests, but yet he did become iconic.
Well, actually, Bill Burr's got a fantastic bit on this in one of his stand-up comedy routines, and he basically said, why do we idolise Steve? Because essentially what he did was he came into a team full of engineers and right, I want all my music on my phone, get on it, and that was the genius of Steve Jobs. Mm. He wasn't sitting there actually figuring out how to do it, he was just driving people really hard. And that was with Theranos and its founder, that was basically what she did too. She said, I have an idea, I want to be able to test blood through a pinprick, and was never able to deliver the technology, and she defrauded a huge number of people as a result of that. So, just having an idea isn't enough.
No, very good point. So tell me, are there any examples of brands that you feel are really nailing their thoughts into actions?
Okay, this is another one that, it's an interesting example because it's fresh in my mind thanks to the COVID lockdown, and obviously that's still very, very, very present for all of us. Is the eHarmony. Now they're just recycling US advertising, but their basic brand proposition is about connecting people online. So that's kind of creating meaningful relationships online is, I think, the way that they phrase it. And what they did, and whether or not this was something that was pre-planned or they just really saw the opportunity in the crisis, and I don't have the media data on it, but their ads were everywhere on TV particularly. And I just remember thinking, just seeing this constant barrage of these ads, but I thought this is for people in lockdown, particularly for people who might be living alone, what genius media placement. Like, it is something whereby they're really living these values about connecting online, and they can't control the product. They're not going to disclude anyone from joining, and it's like any other dating site. It's not everyone's going to be massively compatible, but I just think that the way that their business works is that they claim through their assessment that they can create meaningful relationships by matching people. And the only way they can do that is by having a vast number of people with a vast number of data, so they can start seeing who would actually match up together. So I think that as a brand, your media selection is a huge part of what you do. And they were just really savvy with that, with identifying this is a time when people are going to be watching TV at home. This is absolutely a time for us to be able to start talking about getting people to subscribe. Because it's not like a Tinder or one of those services which relies on meeting in real life and is a free service. This has a financial commitment to join. And it's about creating meaningful relationships online. You don't have to meet in person first. So, I just think that they really hit their brand values on the head with that.
Yeah, you're right, because it was absolutely everywhere. And I think the other ads that were everywhere was they had almost moved their brand into also, that online kind of, literally online dating, which was very smart, I guess, during COVID. So it'd be interesting to see the stats, actually.
Well, yes, and I did try and do a little bit because I don't have them as a client, so it's very difficult for me to get any of that sort of data. But essentially, there's no question in my mind that their media buy spiked hugely during that period. Not only that, people started watching TV then. We did see viewership definitely increase on TV during the time. So, I doubt that TV agencies were actually charging any more. It was probably very good value for them.
Probably. Well, apparently Netflix is having the best quarter it's ever had. So there you go. So by a brand doing it well, and Patagonia was raised as obviously one of those examples during the debate, it helps them to be really the authority in their space and gives them credibility so that, people really do listen to what they have to say. The same as any influencer who does their thing well. Do you have any further kind of, insights or kind of a little bit of, kind of tidbits that you can share? Because I think it's a really interesting topic, and Patagonia is a standout. I think you hear so many people quote Patagonia as an example. Absolutely, and they're authentic.
Being authentic is just if you don't have credibility, you get seen through very, very quickly. And so if you are not living your brand values, it comes out in the wash really, really quickly, particularly with the internet, which is basically a truth serum. There's so much debate back and forth. But I think that they're the brand values that were certainly established by them before they started actually doing marketing, if you like. So it was the lived business, and then they put that into their marketing, and that's the way it all comes together. But I think that there are many brands that try and talk the good talk on it, but don't necessarily deliver. And, that's a really dangerous thing to do if you are a brand that comes out and says we're all about people, but then you find out that they're screwing their employees or they're doing something that's not considered in that vein. That can create a huge amount of backlash. So certainly being able to prove the lived values, and I think it starts with your employees. So I think that if you have a very closely knit marketing department and HR department, that's usually where you get very strong brand values coming through at all touch points. Because the thing is, if you have a premium brand, for instance, and then you have someone who behaves in a less than premium way in your retail outlet, then that is not going to sell the experience. So you have to consider your employees your first customers, and whatever your brand stands for, get people on board who actually believe in it. And also, just as a side note to that, and this is something I've only realised more as I've gotten older, and certainly, you need to work for a company that you believe in. And I realise that's a very first world problem, to be able to say you should choose your employer based on your own values. But I think that if you ever work for an employer and they are not aligned to your values, you will hate yourself within a few months. So it is choose an employer whereby you actually do align with what they're doing, you believe in what they're doing, and you feel like it's home to you, because it does better for the brand and you'll certainly be happier as a person.
Yeah, and I think for me always it's been happy people will make happy customers, which ultimately hopefully brings profits, right? Yes. But I think to your first point as well, that now, we do live in this kind of glass kind of environment, right? There's no longer, we can't hide between, the logos on the wall or the statements on the wall. They're no longer, they don't really mean anything.
Yeah.
And I do feel that, more and more over the years when people come to interview, you have that moment where they're like, I have the moment, I'm like, they're actually interviewing me. I'm here to give them the job, but they're interviewing me, because they do. They want to know, do I want to work for this person? Do I want to work for this company? Does what they say on their website, is that actually what they practice every day.
Absolutely, and look, this is a bit of a personal story. This was from when I was quite junior, but it kind of speaks to what we're talking about here. But I was going for an interview, and it was only a little agency. I think it was an account manager role. Like, this was a long time ago, and I remember I was sitting there with two executives from the agency, and one of them was a gentleman who I just knew in a million years I couldn't work with, and we were kind of 20 minutes in, and they were asking questions, but the thing is, I was on my lunch break as well, so I was trying to fit it in. And I actually just kind of had this moment going, I'm not going to waste his time online. So I just kind of said, look, I don't think it's going to work out. And kind of walked out. He was shocked by that, absolutely shocked. And to be fair, not a genius thing to do, because your reputation in the industry does get around. But that was, when I was very junior, and I just knew it wasn't the right fit for me. So yeah, don't be afraid to walk out.
Yes.
Funnily enough, though, speaking of brands, that have really had some problems with their values, and I think this is a very interesting case study that's just come up in the last few weeks, is CrossFit. So CrossFit obviously is a huge brand. It's got a lot of member affiliates. So, they've got thousands and thousands of gyms that are affiliates around the world. And their founder and former CEO now actually came out and made some fairly racist statements. And this was in the Black Lives Matter movement, and a lot of the very prominent athletes that are actually kind of selling the CrossFit brand through the CrossFit Games and all these other sponsorships that they have, came out and did a lot of vocal social media posts about how they disagreed with what he'd done, and he was basically forced to exit the company. So he's now sold the company, and this all happened in a matter of about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So it was fascinating to see how one person's stupid Twitter can absolutely destroy their ability, because they actually had Reebok pull away from them at the time. Reebok came out and said a statement they wouldn't be sponsoring the games. So no other brand wanted to be affiliated with the sort of statements that he was making. And it was just an incredible lesson that, he was now removed from the company that he founded.
How important is the relationship between purpose and core supply, do you believe, of products and services?
All companies are formed with a purpose, and there is a definite difference between what is a product and what is a brand. So the purpose, if you like, of what you want to do in the world should definitely influence the products that you're producing, but has a lot of influence over what the brand is actually going to stand for. And I do think that your purpose is really important to align everyone in the company. So when you are very clear about what vision that you actually have for your own business, then that's something that can be translated through down into your products, into the people that you have, and to the customer experience that you ultimately deliver. One of the brands that I think is really clear on its purpose and is very strong on its vision is actually Harley Davidson. And I kind of bring that up because the first thing a lot of people think of when they think Harley is bikers and that sort of thing. But they're not selling motorbikes, and they're not even selling lifestyle very much. What they are selling is freedom. And that's why the majority of people who are buying Harley Davidsons are dudes in their 50s. And it's guys who have just gone, really? Is this what we've got in life? I'm hitting the open road. I'm grabbing some boys. And that's what the brand really stands for with that. So when they consider that their purpose is to provide, freedom for people in their everyday lives, Harley Davidson, the product experience really delivers on that, because when you get on a bike, it is very different to being in a car. You do feel free. But at the same time, their brand really talks to that as well. So there's massive enthusiasts for Harley Davidson and people who are hugely loyal to it. And, they've done a really strong job of the alignment of product, brand and purpose.
Yeah, because you see so many brands, and I think especially in retail and manufacturing, that stand for something.
Yes.
But actually, when you look down the supply chain, it's perhaps does not really align to the purpose.
Yes, and I do think that, for instance, Coca-Cola has been touting happiness for a long time as being kind of one of that's what their purpose is to bring joy and bring happiness. And look, whether or not having a Coke actually does make you happy, I think that is. I think that's debatable necessarily. But also, I think that it feels now that in many cases, people see through that to what the product is, which is a whole load of chemicals and sugar in a can. And with the new generation particularly, they're not going to look at that and say, well, that's going to equal happiness for me. So they're having to take a little bit more in how do we modernise, how do we actually start thinking about how we bring it to a younger generation. And it's not to say the Coke's in trouble at all, certainly they're not, but their competition now through things like kombucha and, other smaller batch, more naturally produced, things that actually deliver to what happiness means now is definitely a threat to them.
Yeah, it's interesting that. And, one of the things that was asked was, do you believe that this purpose thing is actually just really academic and kind of more of a luxury, because as the world is sliding more and more into recession and, they're talking about a global depression bigger than the actual Great Depression.
Yeah.
Do you believe that will shift people's perception around purpose?
Look, I do think that there's a cynicism towards marketing guff a lot of the time. However, I do believe that this comes down to company leadership. Because if they're just going, we need a purpose, and kind of let marketers run off and do it, and then it's not fully believed by the people who are managing the business and making the decisions, I do think that that's a waste of time and money. However, if you have leadership that is genuinely believing what they're doing and they really are behind the purpose of what they are doing this company for, then that's much more powerful. And that's because, again, it's authentic. It's authentic.
Yes.
So that's really authentic. That's when you have a leader who's able to say, this is what we're doing for the community, this is what we're doing for the customer, and this is what we're doing for the people who work for us. And again, once you have alignment on all of that, it becomes really clear and the vision is really strong. So
yeah, and I do think that, even with this notion that people who are coming into the workforce now are willing to take lower pay for a more, purpose-driven company and a more ethical and authentic company, I think will continue to drive that shift even during these times.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say it's just younger people. I know this sounds quite funny, but socially, I've certainly had a few conversations this year where people who've been, in the corporate world for 20 years are going, I don't feel fulfilled. There are people who are starting to think about, do I need to look at something else? Do I need to have a side hustle? Do I need to think beyond just what I always thought was going to make me happy or what was going to drive my success?
Yeah.
So there does seem to be an awakening point somewhere in the midlife as well.
And just another question for you, because, I think the flip side of that, and I guess from more of a marketing perspective, do you believe that actually COVID and what is happening will shift more people who perhaps were a little bit more skeptical previously into this notion of, well, actually, we are all in it together and we are all living on this one planet and we are really all connected, and COVID's really proven that?
I think it actually, I don't think it's universal. I think it very much matters in the country that you're in, and I think you only need to look to the US to say, well, if your leader's just saying, well, this is just something that we're living with now, and we've got 3 million cases and 130,000 dead. I actually think that in many cases, if it's having that sort of impact on you, you're going to go completely the other way and become very isolated and not want to be community-based. Whereas I think in Australia, where, fingers crossed, we still have a handle on it. Come on, Victoria.
So, and you touched on this already a little bit, but the role, and of people and culture behind brands. How important is this to the brand itself and the perception of that brand?
Yes.
Yeah.
I do think, I definitely think that people coming on board is really important, but there's a company called Huel, which stands for human fuel, and that's all very right on. Like it's basically, all of your nutrients and things in a liquid shake. So if you're not like me, if you're someone who who doesn't care what they eat, whereas very much an eater, this is something that will provide you with nutrients and you don't have to worry about eating essentially on it. But one of the biggest signs that they have on the entry to their office is, don't be a dick. Like that's in huge letters over kind of when you walk in, and it's a reminder to everyone who's a part of this is that we're trying something new and we need to have ideas, we need to be collaborative, and this isn't about you, it's about something bigger. So I definitely think that having those reminders about what we do and don't do in companies can really make an impact on how consumers at the other end kind of receive our products and have that. And just as again, drawing on my own personal experience of corporate worlds and company life, I remember thinking that there's a very big difference when you work for a company that has a no-blame culture versus if you work for a company that's looking for the person who stuffed it up. And when you kind of look at the brands that had come out, because funnily enough, I worked in a company which had both premium brands and commodity brands as part of its remit. And the premium brand area, if you like, was separate from the FMCG side. And they very much had a no-blame culture. They were very strong on that. It was, okay, this is the situation, how do we solve it? And it was always about problem solving rather than looking into why things went wrong in the first instance. Whereas the other side wasn't necessarily like that. And what you really saw then was that there was great innovation in the luxury side, and people way less willing to take any risk on the blame side. And then you actually, that resulted all the way through the pipeline. Like that's, you had innovative products being built at one end, and then something that just had a huge problem with changing anything. So,
it's interesting because a few years ago we actually implemented something within our own business called Fail Forward.
Yeah.
And so every week, you know, at the operational meeting, it would be like, okay, biggest cock up of the week essentially, so that we can say, okay, well, this is why it happened, and let's not do that again, and how do we fix it for the future? Like almost fixing the links in the chain. But it is hard because I think people are innately scared to fess up generally, right? So
absolutely. And I mean, working in creative industries, I think that for many ways it's freeing for me personally, because creative ideas are your baby and there is no right and wrong. So when you come to the floor with that, you've got to expect that not everyone's going to be on board potentially, and it might be wrong and it might be right, and you'll have some supporters and detractors, and that's just life. And so that was what my initial career going through was. But when you're dealing in industries whereby there's formulaic ways of doing things, this right and wrong thing becomes a lot bigger. But I certainly think that that's where innovation gets crushed, because you have to be comfortable enough to come up with an idea that could get shot down without feeling like it's going to jeopardise your reputation or anything else. So yeah, it's a great idea to have, those Fail Fridays, whatever it was. It's great.
Just fail forward, not the whole day. So how does a brand differentiate between what they need to communicate versus how their customers or potential customers want to feel? And you know, how do brands, I guess, then kind of rebuild trust in those situations?
Oh, look, that's a very challenging thing between it, because what brands need to communicate, when you look at it from a marketing point of view, should always be based on what customers need anyway. So I think that there's, look, for a lot of people, you know, talking about what your product does seem to be the natural thing that you want to do, but obviously it's talking about a product, it's not talking about the brand. And what I think is really important, that you always start thinking about your consumer at the beginning of your communication, and not, well, this is us and this is what we need to say. It's, well, what is the consumer, what do they need to hear?
Can I ask you, what about this idea and, you know, of closing the loop as well? Because obviously, you know, bad feedback, and in today's world where you just, one tweet can create an absolute tsunami of, you know, feedback. You know, how important do you think it is for brands to really kind of not shut it down, but address kind of the flip side and really own up?
Yeah, absolutely. And most people are willing to forgive, you know, and it doesn't take a huge amount in order for a customer with a negative experience to be overcome. If they feel like they're listened to, if they feel like they've gotten something as compens for, you know, whatever bad thing happened to them, then that is absolutely fine. You'll likely keep the customer. So yeah, having feedback and making sure that we listen to people is really important. But also on the flip side of that, as a consumer, unless you have a real gripe, shut up. Like, I know this sounds terrible, but consumers are certainly powerful, but it's not an outlet unless you have a real problem just to jump on a bandwagon. And I think consumers have a responsibility too. And I say that as a consumer.
Yeah.
So I would certainly never go and publicly slam a company unless I had a real reason for doing so. Just little gripes or little petty grievances or looking for free stuff, like, take a long hard look at yourself.
Yeah. Great. We had quite a few questions that really came from that marketing perspective. So regardless of whether people care or don't care about what your brand thinks now, do you think that this will play a much bigger role in the future? And I know we touched on this slightly.
I do think that brands are always going to be important to people, but people aren't going to sit there and think about your brand. It's just when they come to buying between different products in the same area, which one feels right to them. And that's where your brand's important. And I do think that, you know, I remember saying to a client once, no one's going to see your ad for washing detergent and run out immediately and buy washing detergent. That's not how it works. It's what you're hoping is they see the ad, it feels good to them. So when they're standing at shelf in the supermarket and they're looking at all the washing detergents, for whatever reason, yours feels right to them.
Yeah.
That's the importance of brand. So we do it subconsciously, and it's just because we're here as marketers that we're talking about it openly. For the most part, consumers may have one or two brands that they really love, that they really identify with, and everything else is just a feeling of what's right and wrong for them.
So regardless of whether people care or don't care about what your brand thinks now, do you think that this will play a bigger role in the future?
I'm not sure if it's a bigger role, because people, whether they realise it or not, are influenced by brand now. So brand is always going to be something, whether you're deliberately thinking about it or it is just a feeling for you, is going to be something that's present in your world. And it's often just, for instance, if you're running an advertisement on TV, it's not that someone's going to see your ad and run down immediately and buy your product. It's more likely, though, that when they do come to buy the product, if they've liked your ad, there's just a feeling of that feels right for me. And that's really what brands stand for.
A question that was asked a few times is, how can marketers think more like you?
Oh, good times. I think that, one of the biggest things that I drive towards is being consumer-centric. So always making sure that I have the consumer at the heart of what I'm doing, is to also do stakeholder management. So it's actually easier to take risks if you've gotten the right people on board before you start making any risky decisions. So make sure that whoever your stakeholders are, bring them along the journey and get them aligned as you go through. And also, though, just keep interested. I think that learning from what others are doing and being excited and passionate about what our industry is doing is really beneficial. Yeah.
And I think probably your response to this next question will give a lot more insight probably as well into, what it is that as a marketer, how you can truly influence. Because with all of this brand purpose and words like, turning words into actions talk, how can organisations make the most of their, and sometimes very severely kind of, constricted budgets? And, how do we get that cut through? How do we engage first? Like, is it PR? Is it strategy? Is it social? Is it ads?
Every agency will tell you that they're the number one that you need to talk to first. And it does need to be a collaborative effort, but I do think the first point of call when you have a limited budget and you need to do something is look at what resources you already have in-house. So do you have a customer data list? Do you actually know what works for them and what doesn't? Are you really in touch with what the customer's doing? And what are your touch points? So do you have real estate on packaging? Do you have retail space where you can go and do things and actually start doing some, for instance, some small events in a store that you could actually then see through social as content? How can you start better leveraging what you're already doing? And I think that's when I have a small budget, when if there's something very limited that you want to make a lot bigger, I always look at what are we currently doing that we can actually make bigger, rather than we need a new brief, we need to have a whole new range of solutions. Inevitably, you'll have stuff that you're not maximising at the moment.
I think probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the biggest things that, for me, that I've taken out from the conversation so far is, link marketing to HR, because really those people will attract people, they'll attract customers, they'll attract the best people that, you want working for you, essentially.
Absolutely, and also look at your own staff as being, like everyone's got social media, they're little advertising beacons of their own. Give staff stuff that they can see themselves. I can't tell you the amount of times that I've seen HR go off and use an agency and do an employer branding campaign and have something that's quite removed from marketing and what they're doing with consumers. And on the flip side of that, when you see that they're working very well together, it feels so much more harmonious. Like everything just feels like it's a natural part of one campaign. So I'm not suggesting that advertising agencies should start doing HR comms. No. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is if there's alignment in what your values are, then that does translate through the different work that you're doing. So.
Well, I think, and you've said it a few times now, that really it's about putting the consumer at the centre of everything that you do. But your opening statement was your employee is your first consumer.
Absolutely.
So I think that's really good insight, and I think really important thing to remember, especially during these times. And really thinking about, I guess, the future, and I think we all dream of a post-COVID world. Is there such a thing as a COVID-safe idea.
Well, it's certainly not going to be the new Made in Australia logo. So, look, is there a COVID? I think some brands have done really well through this period.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I was speaking earlier about eHarmony, there's some brands that Kleenex has done amazingly well during this period. So there have been, you know, some products that have actually made gravy in this time, and it's very unfortunate for businesses that are based on, you know, eating out or dining or, you know, socialising out of doors or, you know, transport or any of those businesses. They're really suffering. And I think that, you know, the media focus has been on the businesses that are suffering more than the businesses that are making gravy, which is the right approach to do at the time. No one wants to hear about the fantastic successes at the detriment of someone else. Yeah. So, you know, there are some businesses who have certainly done brilliantly well, and it's the businesses that are, I mean, Zoom. Who heard of Zoom 3 months ago?
Yeah, they have skyrocketed that.
Yeah, and so I certainly think that any brands or businesses that are digitally led, and the ones that seem to be quite successful through this were the ones who were able to take advantage and pivot their media strategies and thinking about their products and what they deliver to people who aren't necessarily going out.
Yeah.
So, you know, even Cotton On of all brands switched from, you know, talking about their clothing and started really kind of pushing their pajamas and their comfy ranges. So, you know, that was...
I did buy a pair of pajamas from them online during COVID.
See, there you go. And I think the pajama hoodie industry probably did very well through the period as well. But it's as long as you're able to see the opportunities, there should be opportunities for a lot. But I mean, if you're an Uber driver, you know, there's no value that you can possibly add potentially other than, you know, home delivery. So and they're the things that you look at and just go, there are some things that will just have a tough time.
Yeah, absolutely. So Carolyn, thank you so much. Thank you for all of your insights. Thanks for coming in and, you know, sharing your ideas and thoughts with us. Post the great debate, we had an overwhelming response specifically to a lot of what you were saying and some of your thinking, and we really felt that this was a great opportunity to share with our audience a bit of a deeper insight into, you know, how do you think more like you? How do you stick to your lane? You know, and really that notion that the consumer really does care about what your brand thinks and does, really. So thank you so much for your time again today.
Thank you. And look, thank you to ICMI as well for getting me in touch. And I've thoroughly enjoyed being a part of this process. So very much appreciated.
Great. Thank you.